Hi, it's Sally here to talk about booking accommodation for your trip. So if you've watched my earlier videos on planning your itinerary, I want you to open your Google Sheet now so that we can start recording where you're going to be staying on your trip. So my go-to for booking accommodation is booking.com. Agoda, others, they're similar. I like booking.com because most of their accommodation options have free cancellation. The other advantage of using one platform is you can view all of your bookings. And so you can make sure that they're sequential and then you don't have gaps or overlaps. But you can get discounts often if you book directly. So if you're good at keeping track, then you might want to look up hotels directly after finding them on a platform like booking.com. An advantage of booking.com or another platform is that your payment often goes through the platform, it's a nice convenient thing. You don't have to worry about whether your credit card is going to work at the hotel. You don't have to worry about, skimming or something in certain areas. But be aware that booking.com has been infiltrated by its own scammers. So if you get messages from the direct messaging app asking for your details or something, it will look like it's from a hotel. It's not. It's a scam. Ignore those messages. Now, if you're staying in hostels, I would also check hostels.com. That's hostels with a Z. That is not a booking platform. It is a comparison platform. It will look up different platforms. That way you'll get a more comprehensive listing of the hostels available in that city, and you'll get a price comparison. If you're going to a country with a national hosteling network, you might want to look that up separately, just because sometimes those aren't listed on platforms, or there might be certain details you want to know about on the actual National Hosteling Association website. If you're not sure whether you want to stay in hostels, I'm going to make a video about pros and cons for you. Airbnbs. I only use these as a last resort when I cannot find anything else. I do not want to be arriving somewhere late at night and be trying to figure out some weird instructions about how to get in. I don't feel entirely safe staying in them as a solo female. I'd way rather just stay in a hotel or a hostel. So the easiest way to start booking your accommodation is just start with your first night and your last night. It is a good idea to book these ahead of time so that you're not scrambling when you're tired and jet lagged. And you know where you're going to be landing and departing from. So just book those now. You'll probably want to stay a few nights in both of those places, I'm guessing. So you want to find a good place that is accessible from the airport, but also in a neighborhood where you want to be. So the first thing you want to do is figure out, how do you get from the airport to downtown? Is it a train? Is it a bus? Figure out a hotel or a hostel that is accessible from a bus stop or a train station along that route. Just make it easy on yourself. At this stage, you're going to be tired, jet lagged. This is especially important if you're arriving late at night or maybe really early in the morning and you're going to put your bags in bag storage. If it's going to be dark, you're gonna want to make it easy on yourself. You might not have a SIM card at that point when you first land, so again, another reason to just make it easy on yourself. Try to book a flight that lands mid-afternoon, because then you won't be wandering around the city like a zombie all day. You won't have to store your bags. You also won't have to worry about getting to your destination late at night, which can be a safety consideration. It's just also harder when it's dark out. Make sure that the transportation is running at the time that you're going to be arriving, whether that's the train or the bus. And make sure to give yourself a grace period to get your luggage, to figure out where the platform is, how to buy a ticket. These things can take a while. Your flight might be delayed. Just make sure to give yourself some extra time to get to that first accommodation. I would suggest trying out the filters on booking.com as a first step. So select your key criteria here on the left. I like to limit the results to the ones that are rated an 8 or 9 out of 10. I also often know that I want a kitchen, so I click on this self-catering option. Then I organize them by price. Here you'll get a sense of how far each of these options is from the city, so that can be really helpful. So at that point, I just pick one near the top. for me because I'm cheap. And then I put it into Google Maps and I find the directions from the airport. If it's too complicated, then I move on to the next one and see what that looks like in terms of getting from the airport. So assuming you're going to stay there a few days, you want to find a neighborhood that, matches your vibe. You can check the guidebook, make sure on Google Maps that there's some restaurants, maybe a grocery store in the area, and that it's close enough to the sites that you want to see. Generally speaking, if it's somewhere in sort of the downtown core, according to Google Maps, then, that's good enough. You can also use the map function on booking.com. Okay, so once you've made a selection here, and you know that it's in a good location, it's accessible from the airport, it's not in the diviest neighborhood, and the neighborhood has some reasonable amenities in it, book it. Write down your check-in time, the check-out time. Write down if there's baggage storage, if you're going to need that. And write down if there is a free breakfast included. So same things apply when you're flying out. If you're flying out really early, try to book something that's easy to get from there to the airport on public transportation if that's what you're relying on. And make sure that transportation's running that early. You could consider staying somewhere with an airport shuttle. There is a filter for that on booking.com. As you book, highlight the boxes blue once you know something's booked. If you're not booking on booking.com, you may need to wait for a confirmation email or something to know that it's for sure booked before you highlight that blue. This is really important because you don't want to show up at a hotel and find out that your booking didn't actually go through. And note down any further steps you need to take after booking. Some places do expect you to contact them to let them know your arrival time. Often they have special instructions for getting in. Make sure you note those down because again, you're going to want to make sure that you have your SIM card organized, that you are paying attention to your phone calls or your texts, and that you're sending those arrival texts or whatever when you're being expected to. So as you go down your spreadsheet, just follow more or less the same process. Think about what train station or bus stop you're going to be arriving at. Make sure you check. Sometimes there's multiple train stations or bus stops within one city. They might even have similar names. Make sure you book somewhere that's relatively easy to get to, especially if you're arriving late at night or early in the morning. Make sure there's baggage storage if you're going to need it, if you're going to arrive before check-in time, or if you're going to leave after check-out time. As an alternative, sometimes you can get baggage storage at a train station, a bus station, even a museum. A lot of big museums have lockers and coat checks. So I would suggest researching and where relevant, booking your transportation as you go here. That way you know what your arrival point is and you can book accommodation that's within easy reach. So if you need help planning transportation, I have a separate video about that. I would watch that now so you can do this in tandem. So it's a good idea right away once you've booked this accommodation here and written down in this column all of the names of the hotels or hostels you're going to stay at. Just go through once more and just make sure that you've got those dates correct. I've seen people show up in tears at the reception desk when they realize that they've booked the wrong night. They've gotten their itinerary screwed around. It's good to check now. We're going to check again later, just before the trip, to make sure that everything's still in order, but just make sure you got all of those nights right. This is why this particular column is so important, where we say sleeping tonight in. This is going to help you make it crystal clear your dates. So double check on booking.com on this page where you can check all of your bookings in sequence, and make sure you don't have any gaps or overlaps. So you may be asking right now, do I really need to book all this accommodation ahead of time? Here's my advice. If you're traveling in high season, yes, especially in Europe, North America, things book up. If you're traveling to smaller places with really limited accommodation, yes, you do not want to arrive on the last train just to find out there's nowhere to stay. If you want to stay in the best value places, yes, book ahead. If you're traveling during a major holiday, yes, you should book it now. If you're the kind of person who just wants to go on your trip and enjoy yourself, not be Googling things or stressed about making choices on your vacation, yes, you should book them now. You can always alter things as you go along. And this is especially useful with booking.com. If you write down the dates that you can cancel by, you can always change up your plans, but it's nice to have something booked as a sort of fallback to make sure that you're not going to end up out on the street. A lot of them allow you to cancel as little as 24 hours ahead. So there are certain regions where you do not need to book ahead, at least not during anything other than peak season. For instance, Southeast Asia, you can usually book rooms a few days ahead as you go, but you still might miss out on the best options. You'll probably always be able to find something in big cities with lots of accommodation options, unless it's something huge like the Olympics. But again, you might not be able to get the best value place. You might also find yourself having to move between hotels or hotel rooms or hostels or hostel beds, which is actually kind of a hassle because of the gap between check-in time and check-out time. So booking ahead makes sure that you can book the sequential nights that you need. The other exception to booking ahead is that there's certain types of trips and destinations that you actually can't book ahead because the accommodation doesn't have a website, it doesn't really expect anyone to book ahead of time. I believe there's also some places where it's just always been first come, first served. For instance, pilgrim accommodation, I believe, on the Camino, guest houses in Nepal, countries where, there's not a whole lot of internet infrastructure, where, guest houses don't even have a website. Places I've stayed like that in the past are Cuba, Bali. I'm not sure how it is these days. Maybe there are more places with websites, but in those cases, it's good to just either show up or use the phone number that's in a guidebook or a recommendation from a friend. Or as you're traveling, you can ask the hosts of the place where you're staying to call ahead. They might have some recommendations. If you don't want to book ahead of time, make sure to do some research to make sure that that's going to work. Check up-to-date guidebooks, check up-to-date websites. Do not believe somebody in your office who says that, they went to Europe for 2 months and didn't book anything ahead of time. Either they did not travel during peak season, or they were, traveling 15 years ago when people didn't have to book anything, or they were staying in crappy, expensive hotels. So, for some reason, people like to brag about how spontaneous they are, but a lot of those are sort of outdated notions. Take that with a grain of salt. So on the other end of the spectrum, there's some places where you need to be incredibly on top of things with bookings. You need to know exactly when the bookings are going to be made available, and you need to call or be online right away. So things like this would include huts, alpine huts in really epic locations, say in the Dolomites, campsites in national parks in Canada and the US. A lot of those book up within seconds, not minutes, hours, weeks, months, seconds. You need to be right on it if you're going to travel in some of these really high demand places. So fortunately, most places are not like that. I would recommend booking a few months ahead of time, not more than say 8 months, because the bookings won't even be available at that point in a lot of hotels. But book it as soon as you can after you book your flight is generally good advice, because then you'll be able to get those really special places at really good prices. And that's it. I'll see you at the next video.